Shalom, and welcome to The Crossover, joining Jews and Christians through their God. Today we have a very special guest with us, Ephraim Kaye. He is working at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is the Jewish people's memorial to the murdered 6 million and symbolizes the ongoing confrontation with the rupture engendered by the Holocaust. He is here in Houston teaching from a program called Echoes and Reflections to a group of teachers who are going to teach the Holocaust. Before he takes off back to Jerusalem, we have him here with us to just kind of get to know him and see what it takes to really promote this education and what kind of effect it has on him dealing with Holocaust issues from morning till night.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. And now, here is your host, Rosalie Jerome.
Welcome to the program.
Nice to be here.
Ephraim, just a little bit about you. I spoke with you after lunch about the fact that at 18 you chose to make Aliyah. You were born in Boston. Were you raised Orthodox or conservative?
Parents are conservative. We belong to a conservative shul. But I would say we were more of a Jewish assimilated family. I went to a public high school in Newton, outside of Boston, Newton South High School, which was predominantly Jewish. About 60-70% of the student body were Jewish. But it was a public high school, and our Jewish education was up until Bar Mitzvah, which we all loved to do because it was parties and presents. But after that, it was very, very minimal. And essentially, my turning point in terms of who I am, my Jewish identity, was probably the June Six-Day War in 1967. I was 16 years old, watching the TV set, listening to a very eloquent person speaking English from a different world, Al Be'even, presenting the Israeli case at the United Nations. And I never really knew this little country, Israel, Jewish state, had no meaning for me whatsoever. And I saw on television an Israeli army that in 6 days destroyed 5 air forces and managed to not only protect themselves but to find themselves in the Suez Canal, in the Sinai, in the West Bank. It opened my eyes. And the next summer I volunteered to be a worker, a volunteer in a kibbutz. I signed up for a program through the New York office, and I came in 1968 for 2 months. I was 17 years old. I'd never been out of the United States, and I had the time of my life. Volunteer in a kibbutz, working 8 hours a day in the hot sun.
Where?
It was called Kibbutz Galed. It's not far from Haifa. It's about, let's say, about 40 kilometers east of Haifa. Near a string of kibbutzim, Kibbutz Ramat HaShofet, Ein HaShofet, Dalia, and Kibbutz Galed was at the end of the road. It was a kibbutz populated mainly by Jews that came from Germany, a Yekisha kibbutz. And I spent 2 whole months. Went back, finished my senior year in high school, and then to my parents' great dismay, after being accepted to several American universities, decided to come to the Hebrew University for a year to learn a little Hebrew, this and that, and then I decided to stay in Israel, again to their great dismay, and I volunteered, I became a citizen, and I went to the Israeli army for 4 years. The end of my service was supposed to be in November of 1973. The Yom Kippur War broke out. They kept us in the service another 6 to 8 months. I was actually demobilized only in April of May of 1974.
You experienced the Yom Kippur War.
I fought in the Yom Kippur War.
Tell us just a little bit about that day.
Most of my battalion was on the Golan Heights, but the actual company that I was attached to was doing a squad training course, and they were in a different camp not far from Nablus. I made my way to that camp, They'd left a few hours earlier in the morning. I got there in the afternoon. And I made my way through Nablus to a place called Kfar Yona, which is not far from Netanya, where the company was reorganizing itself. I met up with my company. And on that day, Sunday evening, we were sent down to a place called Refidim, which is a very large air base in central Sinai, with the 2 other companies of paratroopers. And that's where our experience began. The actual combat experience began when we crossed the canal 2 days after the first paratroop forces crossed the canal. And from there, we had continual fighting. My CO, who was the first lieutenant of the platoon, was killed. A radio operator was killed. Another soldier from the platoon was also killed. We had 3 or 4 that were wounded. Essentially, we began the war with about 28 in the platoon. When the war was over, we had less than 20 that were actually functioning members of the platoon. And our mission was to cross the canal and go further to north to a place called Ismailia. And we encountered firefights with Egyptians that didn't really know we were on their side of the canal. And that's where the war ended for us on the 22nd or 23rd of October. 2,200 Israeli men and women were killed in the Yom Kippur War. Multiply that by 5 or 6 and you have the number of wounded. It was an attack by both Syria and Egypt simultaneously at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It took a very heavy toll, but I think the Yom Kippur War is one of those places where the Israeli improvisation, the Israeli, because our army is made up of mostly reservists, and it's a people's army, it's not a very large professional army, people know why they're fighting and what they're fighting for. And individual acts of bravery on very, very low level, junior officers and NCOs, are essentially what saved Israel from the complete, well, not destruction, but on the Golan Heights, the tankists that fought there. Mm-hmm. You have a tank battle called the Valley of the Tears, where a person called Lieutenant Colonel Avigdor Kahalani, literally, he had less than 100 tanks. He destroyed over 300 Syrian tanks.
In the Yom Kippur War?
During the Yom Kippur War, and starved off a Syrian advance on the northern part of the Golan Heights.
Gosh, you know, you represent so many things and so many topics that we deal with on the crossover. We'll be right back after a special segment from one of the teachings with Ephraim Kaye at the Warren Fellowship at the Holocaust Museum. Enjoy it.
We will be right
Elie
back.
Wiesel and his family are coming from, it's now May 1944, but only in March of 1944 were these Hungarian Jews affected by the Holocaust, directly affected. Only in March of 1944, when the German army invades Hungary, they're afraid their eastern front was crumbling, and Admiral Horthy, the Hungarian fascist leader, he was trying to make his way maybe to the Allies, and the Germans invaded Hungary to shore up their eastern front. But there were 800,000 Jews that were still alive in Hungary in 1944, the last large, great Jewish community. And in March of 1944, Adolf Eichmann, who worked in the SS, he arrived in Budapest with a small team. It was called Kommando Eichmann. And their mission, his mission, was to round up these 800,000 Jews of Hungary and send them to Auschwitz as soon as possible. Now, in 1944, the Germans are losing the war. It's very clear. But this remained one of their major missions and goals, to destroy this last large Jewish community. Ladies and gentlemen, between May, June, and part of July, in 2.5 months, it's estimated that about 430,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz. Tori, you were at Auschwitz, right? When you go into Birkenau, you actually see a train, a railroad track that goes right inside the camp and takes you right up to crematoria 2 and 3. Remember? That wasn't there. That wasn't there before 1944. When Jews and others arrived at Auschwitz, they got off at Auschwitz I, where the main train station was. You saw that at Auschwitz, the small city there. It's a very large train station. And they schlepped the people. People had to walk 3 kilometers from Auschwitz I to Birkenau. Where there, they went through selection, and they were gassed. But 1944, realizing that now a very large Jewish community would arrive there, they wanted to be more efficient. And they built a added-on railway line from Auschwitz I to Birkenau, and actually inside, it took you all the way up directly to crematoria 2 and 3 to make it more efficient. And this was Eichmann and his mission.
Here is your host, Rosalie Jerome.
Ephraim, you were asked to come all the way from Jerusalem to teach at the Holocaust Museum in Houston, Texas, your first time in Texas. And you were very animated. You are teaching, correct me if I'm wrong, at Yad Vashem. You are teaching, explain what you're doing at Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem, we have an international school for Holocaust studies. It's the vision of our commander-in-chief, Avner Shalev, who came to Yad Vashem in 1993 and looked forward to the 21st century and said, how are we going to pass on the memory of the Holocaust, the memory of the Shoah, to future generations? And for him it was a very simple answer: education. And his vision was to create an international school for Holocaust studies on the campus of Yad Vashem. I may add that I have been at other Holocaust memorials around the world. Yad Vashem is probably the only Holocaust memorial that has a school of education. It's 3 stories, 17 classrooms. All of our educational activities take part in that school. In the year 2006, we had 250,000 students, soldiers, teachers, people from outside the country, Israeli teachers, teachers from outside, all over the world that came to that school to get some kind of instruction.
Do you have to be a teacher to take that, or you could just go if you're a media person, or you're teaching?
We love everybody. We love everybody.
All right, just curious.
And I'm the director of a department inside the school that gives international seminars for educators. And we have, in my department, about 15 to 16 international seminars over a year, some specifically for Jewish educators in Jewish day schools, some for educators, non-Jewish educators that are in Catholic schools or in universities or wherever it may be. And they come to us for 2 to 3 weeks, and we take into the dynamics of what happened before the Holocaust, during, and the aftermath.
Okay. Well, there were some things that you were saying today that I was getting, we were discussing Holocaust denial.
Yes.
And that there's actually people nowadays promoting it in our universities in the United States and trying to, they're finding loopholes, whatever you might, what did you call that today? Little pieces that look like it doesn't exist, or that it didn't happen, or to the level that we know it did. And when you showed those documents that the Nazis kept, I was getting nauseous, almost couldn't. Do you have people that react like that just from data?
I think sometimes the data is overwhelming. The Nazis were very meticulous. They did leave a paper trail, and more often than not, they did try to destroy a lot of documentation that dealt with the final solution. But fortunately, I say for us, even with all of the destruction of physical evidence at death camps, of anything that pertained to the victims that they had murdered there, they did leave enough of a paper trail for us to know what exactly transpired, together with testimonies of Jews, together with Poles who actually saw what was going on right next to their little cities and towns, together with information we have from the Soviets who were liberating their areas from German occupation, and they're the ones that actually found and liberated Majdanek in July 1944, and Auschwitz the complex of Auschwitz on the 27th of January 1945.
When you showed the engineer plans today, that's what hit me the most. That these engineers knew exactly what they were doing. That
Exactly what they were doing.
Showing on that paper, and you'll see right now on the screen, exactly they knew how many personas it would kill.
How many they could burn in 24 hours.
Yeah, it was just...
That's the German meticulousness.
You know, you're living in Israel, the rise of of radical Islam or Islamofascism, whatever you want to call it, is obviously, Israel's been dealing with it for a long time. 9/11, America got a taste of it. You know, we call it this war on terrorism, which is kind of a joke because it's like, that's like war and guerrilla warfare. I mean, terrorism is a form of warfare. The war is against Islamofascism. Do you agree?
There is no doubt whatsoever that there is genocidal language within the Muslim, fundamentalist, Islamic, extremist groups.
But it's not just in the groups, Ephraim, it's in the book.
Two things. There are two things. The Quran, as other religious texts, can be interpreted in different ways. And these movements, be it the Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, these are people that, for political purposes of a discontent with the Arabs and where they are, not just Arabs, also Muslims, they're not particularly not Arabs.
Right.
The Iranians are not Arabs, they're Muslims, they're not Arabs.
Right.
Indonesia is the largest Muslim country. But there is a general frustration of where they are vis-a-vis the Western world. This has been going on for many, many years. But with this Al-Qaeda and the attack on 9/11 on the Twin Towers in the United States, the Western world is seen as something that's dangerous to their entire existence. And the Western world, America, Israel, that plays in. It's always Israel, United States, Israel, those things go together.
Big Satan, little Satan, whatever.
Yes, and the fact that Israel is sort of a needle in their tuchus in the Middle East, there is something that also plays into the whole story.
The only democracy.
It's a democracy, it's a free society.
Lebanon used to be.
It's a free society, it's a democracy, but it's a whole area that doesn't belong to the Muslim world. They see Israelis as occupiers. I'm not talking about occupiers just in places which, quote unquote, belonged to them before 1967. If anyone reads the Hamas or Hezbollah, you're talking about Israel proper, is occupying Arab land.
Right. And because their book says once a land was owned by Muslims, or was it under like the Ottoman Empire for, 400 years, therefore it's a real shame on them that Allah is not ruler over that whole area, that, you know, that it needs to come back.
We have to put things in perspective. The holiest site for Islam and Muslims is Mecca.
Right.
And Medina.
It is nothing. It's not even written in their book, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem is only referred to as El-Quds. El-Quds is the holy city. It's never mentioned specifically. I think Jerusalem is mentioned over 800 times within the Jewish Bible.
That's enough, right.
So it's not something that's inherently, but because of the politicalization of the conflict, it's seen as something that belongs to Islam. The Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, the Dome of the Rock, these become the foundation stones all of a sudden of Islam, which is not correct.
We will be right back. For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. The crossover exists to communicate to the Jewish community that there is a growing group of Christians who love them unconditionally. The focus of the crossover program is to promote a greater understanding of the differences and similarities between Jewish and Christian customs, history, and theology, while encouraging a closer walk with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, Rosalie's Jewish heritage includes parents who were protected from the Nazis by Christians. Yet for more than a decade, Mitch and Rosalie searched for meaning in life in the New Age movement. But after returning to their Judeo-Christian roots, they discovered God's purpose for their lives: to rebuild bridges between Christians and Jews. Now through TV, radio, the internet, speaking engagements, the healing room, and print and video resources, they are reuniting Jews and Christians in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Join Mitch and Rosalie as they tackle tough topics and welcome dynamic guests on The Crossover. The Promised Land.
And I also tried to make it very clear to the Christians all over the world that they are threatened to the same extent as the Jews and Israel are threatened. And I also say basically that Jews and Christians are waiting for the Messiah, who is a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew. And that Messiah is going to come to Jerusalem. And so Christians share this faith with the Jews.
The Hebraic roots of Christianity.
And we began looking at Jesus through Jewish spectacles and not our Texas spectacles or American spectacles or even Western culture spectacles. He's so much more glorious. He's so much more grand. It does not in any way detract from the fact that he's the Son of God, the risen Savior, but he's also a man.
Judaism 101.
Many times people ask, what is a Jew? Is it a race? Is it a people? Is it a culture?
Jewish-Christian relations. Bible, fact or fiction. For more information on The Crossover and The Crossover Project, contact Rosalie Jerome or log on to our website. Here is your host, Rosalie Jerome.
Well, what is Yad Vashem doing in the, considering the history that they've accumulated about what causes genocide? What are they doing as far as research with this rise of Islamofascism?
Okay, I can tell you what I am doing, okay, as someone that's working within Yad Vashem. In all of our international seminars for educators, we have a 2-hour presentation by one of the foremost scholars, Professor Menachem Milson, who's one of the founders of a website called MEMRI, M-E-M-R-I, Middle Eastern
I know that
Media Research Institute. And their job, what they've been doing, is taking things that are being published, being said in mosques all over the Middle East, that are said in Arabic, that are not privy, the Western world is not privy to what they're saying. They only hear very polished, Oxford-speaking Arab emissaries that are saying very different things that are being said in their own countries. And they're taking these things...
Or even within America in the mosques, if they're being spoken in Arabic.
No.
We don't know.
And they're taking these things, translating from Arabic into English and to Hebrew, and bringing it to the knowledge of the Western world. And it's been very, very effective. He gives a 2-hour lecture in every single one of our international courses. It is excruciating. It's painful. You have a stomach ache when you finish his presentation with questions and answers that we allow enough time for that. And there's always another lecture that deals with the new anti-Semitism within all these courses, being the anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, and the Islamism of the conflict. So we do have that within our international seminars, so we're educating.
Okay.
Beyond that, what to do in terms of the Islamic websites, well, that's a whole other story, how to combat those things. It'd be nice to maybe employ hackers that would possibly plant all kinds of viruses and this and that, but that's a whole other story.
I tell you, we have our program on YouTube, and we tend to get a lot of hate mail from Muslims all over the world, and we're not attacking people, the Muslims. I'm attacking the book, and people who tend to really follow that book letter by letter tend to become very anti-life, very pro-hate.
Let me point out something. A person, the Quran in itself is not a negative religious dogma. I think they're very, very beautiful. I'm not entirely privy to the entire Quran from A to Z, but from all the people and the experts I've sat with, Islam does not have to be what it's being perceived of today in the mass media. And I think that extremists have hijacked Islam as a religion to further political purposes that have nothing to do with what's written in the Quran, that have nothing to do with what's written pertaining to Jews, Christians, or any other infidels per se. And I think that's being exaggerated, and unfortunately that's what we're hearing. What's unfortunate is that the moderate Islamic
They're not rising
believers,
up
where
as much as they should.
are they? Where are they in this conflict?
Right. The
Why
bystanders.
aren't they being very clear that this is not a religion of jihad, this is not a religion of hate, this is not a religion of fighting the infidels, this is a religion of love and brotherhood and peace. And if that message was being put forth, I think we'd see a whole different perspective. By the way, I was just watching news last night where this, here in the United States, they found that close to 25% of Islamic youth in the United States support suicide bombing.
Oh my gosh.
And about 10% support Al-Qaeda. And on the one hand, the newscaster was saying, well, 75% are against it. And the newspaper reporter was interviewing someone trying to interpret the results. And among the youth, that 25%, among the youth, it's much higher than 25%. If you take just the youth.
They like to be activists and make a difference.
And what is going on in the mosques? What is going on there, I think, has to worry us all.
Oh yeah, I like what Alan Dershowitz said recently. He said that once a mosque starts hiding arms or raising funds for such things, it's no longer a sacred place.
I agree.
Anyway, I just want to thank, we could go on forever, and I look forward to, when I come to Israel, to visit you. Hopefully you'll be there.
You're invited for Shabbat.
Okay, well good. If you were staying longer, we'd have you at our home for Shabbat.
Okay.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned with The Crossover. We will see you next week at the same time, same place. Shalom.
Join Mitch and Rosalie as they reach an ever-growing worldwide audience through The Crossover. We invite you to become a Crossover partner right now by calling the number on your screen. For your monthly gift of $30 or more, you will receive the Crossover Partnership Pack, which includes a DVD of today's program, a personal greeting and prayer message from Mitch and Rosalie, more information about the Crossover Project. As you continue to support the Crossover each month, you will receive a new Crossover DVD, a monthly ministry report, and your name will be added to the Healing Room. Call now or log on to our website and join the growing family of Crossover partners. And be sure to join us again next week as Mitch and Rosalie tackle timely topics and welcome dynamic guests on The Crossover.
Lord God.